Welcome back to the Think Conversation. Still with me is Mandisa Khanyile from the National Dialogue Secretariat. Mandisa, as we took a break, I asked you to ponder about what would be those issues, just high level. I'm not saying determine the agenda, but high level. What would be those issues that people must expect the dialogue to at least deal with or pay attention to? What are you getting in your national secretariat as the issues that are already starting to come out? I'm not saying determine the agenda, but share with us what are you seeing in your reports, laptops, consultations, and whatever.
So there are certain thematic areas that have obviously come out and stood out, but I want to be very clear that the dialogue is not going to be imposed on communities in terms of what themes they're going to be exploring. Communities are going to be deciding for themselves what are their key priorities. But so far, safety and security is obviously a concern. I mean, you've seen with the Madlanga Commission and what's happening with the public trust as it relates to our infrastructure as a state. Social cohesion and healing. Have we really healed from the 1994 project? What is happening with our country? I mean, specifically, as you can see, with the social compact essentially being ripped to shreds by the likes of the AfriForums and the Solidaridates, who are accusing the black population of genociding them. That's an important conversation, and it obviously needs to come out and be thrashed out through this national dialogue process. Economic justice. We live in one of the most unequal societies in the country. I mean, just last week, we saw one of the biggest economic justice festivals taking place parallel to the G20 protest, which was the We the 99, where civil society actors came together to talk about not just global economic justice issues, but also local ones. Governance reform. I don't think I need to expand on that. Our institutions are not working for the people. How do we make them work? Immigration and border management. I mean, you've seen what's been happening with Operation Dudula, how they've been violating the human rights of foreign nationals, and also those genuine issues that do need to be raised around what happens under health, what happens under education when our systems are inundated by non-citizens. Then you have youth and unemployment. Obviously, that is a huge issue that is affecting this country. Unemployed graduates, young people that do not have access to market. Health and basic services also aligns with the immigration and border management issue, but also as a standalone issue. I mean, what are we doing now, for example, with the HIV response, as we've lost a lot of funds from USAID? Why, for example, was the Department of Health not prepared for that and had its own contingency measures? Gender-based violence and femicide, one of the key issues in this country, and as you know, it's recently been declared a national disaster. And then, of course, corruption and accountability. One of the issues that is really affecting our ability to be responsive as a state is corrupt institutions, and how do we come back from that and take it back? So far, those are the things that have been highlighted.
Mandisa, there's a columnist that writes, and this columnist argues that the Constitution talks about the country must recognize the injustices of the past. I mean, this is the second sentence in our Constitution. We the people is the first sentence. The second sentence is recognize the injustice of the past. Have we, in the national dialogue, made provisions for those injustices to be clearly articulated? Because the possibility is that society does not know what are those injustices that it must recognize so that it can move forward. You know, they say you get forgiven when you know what you have done wrong, and you forgive when you know what the other person has done wrong. So is the dialogue focusing on this thing? Because some of the protests and things give an impression that people have not yet accepted that there was a wrong that was done to South Africa. Talk to us about it.
I think it is very important that we recognize the wrongs of apartheid and let's name it for what it is. I think it's important that we understand that we don't operate in a vacuum. We have a very sad history as a country that we have tried to claw our way back from. And we're struggling because some of those issues remain outstanding. For example, the land question. I do think that the national dialogue needs to address issues like the land question. I really hear from communities how do they see redress. Obviously, things like social housing, the RDP project isn't enough to really quench the thirst of South Africans.
But Mandisa, just
yes.
Do you see those wrongs as an injustice? Because you see, once you see them as an injustice, that should be recognized. It means you then require justice to solve them. You don't only require political process. You require, if you look at what happened in the Middle East, when there was attacks and whatever, after South Africa took the matter of Gaza and made it an international court of justice issue, then it received a different attention. Is the National Secretariat looking at the injustices that we are recognizing in the Constitution as justice issues, as you said earlier, social justice and economic justice?
Remember, we cannot, as the Secretariat, make any determination on what the key issues are going to be in the national dialogue. This is a citizen-led conversation. If the only thing that comes up in the national dialogue, for example, becomes immigration, then that's what the conversation will be. It cannot be us that determines the focus of what South Africans have decided is important to them. Me personally, I believe that it is very important that we actually do some kind of, I don't think the TRC did enough to really deal with this issue. And I think there is a yearning for us to see some kind of justice or even consequences, if nothing else, for the actions that were taken against us as the Black populace of this country. However, that is not going to be determined by us, that is going to be determined by South Africans, and their voices will come out. So let me explain how that would unfold. See, the process is going to go as follows. We're going to have provincial dialogues at community levels, in the ward, all over, and those are going to fill in, and we're going to have an app whereby we actually upload all of these. What will emerge are key thematic areas. Once we have those key thematic areas that come out from the public conversations, we're then going to have thematic sector engagements. So for example, there's going to be an engagement, I believe, around the land question, for example, where we're going to be ironing out exactly what have been the inputs of ordinary South Africans. What do they think? What do they want? What do they think are the solutions? And what is the way forward over the next 20, 30 years on this particular issue? That is going to be formed into a document, which is going to be the new social compact of the country. And that's going to be discussed at the second convention, which will be the closing of the dialogue process, as the first convention was the launch. So we hope, I hope, that issues around how do we really address the injustices of the past in a meaningful way, I hope they emerge. But that is going to be the decision of ordinary South Africans.
Okay, no, thank you. Now I want to ask a very difficult question, but I know it's simple for you. To say, if I may, there's this aunt of mine in Malamulela. I don't think she knows that the national dialogue still goes on. How do you convince her and any other person that will be watching this show that the national dialogue has not died at UNISA?
I think actions are going to convince your aunt and the ordinary citizen. We are obviously going to have a media campaign that soft relaunches the dialogue once we've had the induction of the steering committee. So community radio stations will be engaged. SABC is already on board as we've had discussions with GCIS. And we're going to bring the country into the conversation and encourage them to stop having.
By the way, BDTV wants to be involved also. You can also invite us. Okay, you can continue.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, please do. Want to have as many diverse conversations as possible. Remember, we're not just having these conversations at the ward-based level. We are encouraging the local book club, the local Stokfella, to host their own dialogues. We are encouraging, for example, a television program such as yourself to host dialogues. We've spoken to the big debate to also get on board.
But
we're going to be having these conversations.
Mandisa,
Yes.
I hear that's a very elaborate social program, civil society, on the ground focus. I'm not hearing how are you getting big business, captains of industry into this process. I'm not hearing that, and I'm not seeing it anywhere. What are the issues there? We've got 2 minutes, and I've got to also have wrap up in that 2 minutes. Yeah.
We are engaging with business through their organized structures. We have had conversations with them several times now already, trying to bring them on board for them to understand what this process is, how it's going to affect them as well, because they are also part of the citizenry of this country and they also need to participate in national processes. I believe that they are going to get on board. It is obviously a tit for tat, and we will see if the conversations bring fruit.
Okay, Mandisa, this brings us to the end of this edition. And thank you for joining us, Mandisa Khanyile. We have seen how outstanding issues of national discontent can be used by other nations to cast doubt on South Africa's moral authority in global peace and justice. The national dialogue is an installment this country has to pay forward to the future generation. As Mandisa has opined, we hope there will be traction and will. President Mbeki has already thanked the Minister of Finance for the budget allocation. Let us see other social partners joining in with the same vigor as we saw in the G20 Summit. That's all from the Think Conversation on BDTV. I'm Lucky Mathebula, and goodbye.